Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. In the previous class, we saw and we familiarized ourselves with the definitions and concepts of ecology. And in this particular session, we will look at the methods used for undertaking baseline study. So accordingly, our coverage will include that. We'll look at what do we really do at the scoping stage, what methods are used for the scoping purpose. Then we'll look at the desktop study and survey. So what kind of methods are available for that, and what kind of resources and timing will be needed, and what kind of initial baseline surveys have to be undertaken. Then we'll look into the detailed survey and evaluation of baseline conditions. So what kind of sampling has to be done, what options are available, and what's the purpose of sampling. And then we'll look at various kind of surveys one has to undertake for plants, animal, and habitat survey. Then we'll look into the how one also uses environmental factors and also looks into site history, and how do we look into the changes with or without development, the proposed project, and then how do we really present, describe, and evaluate all these baseline conditions. So accordingly, your learning outcomes expected from you includes that you should be able to discuss the scoping stage and then able to identify different methods which are available to undertake scoping within your baseline study. Further, you should be able to identify various study and surveys method, and should be able to understand what kind of resources and timing will be required and what kind of studies have to be undertaken. Likewise, you should be able to identify various methods for surveys and evaluation for baseline conditions, and what all has to be done, and then how you should be able to understand how the information has to be presented. So looking at the scoping stage, what you really do in the scoping and when we deal with that. So ecological baseline study is important and has to be undertaken with accuracy. So it's very important component, and it needs a lot of accuracy, and undertaking this, it requires good knowledge of the ecology of the site and also its interaction with the nearby areas. So what's really happening within the site, and how it interacts to the surrounding areas. So many times in the screening level itself, so we are looking at a later stage where we are doing the impact assessment. In the screening state itself of EIA, you will be needed to understand whether your study needs particular ecological study or not. That time itself you will understand that. So like in India, if you can recollect, we saw EIA notification 2006. You can see under the schedule that any activity categorized in B will be treated as A if particular proposed project partially or fully comes in the radius of the protected area or eco-sensitive area. So at the screening stage itself, your category will change further. What kind of detailed study would be required will be decided here. So you can see part of the notification snipped for you here. Also at the international level, like we see at Equator, you have seen the Equator Principles, International Finance Corporation, Regional Development Banks, all these require to undertake this ecological assessment. And it is important by these agencies as well that a very clear cut understanding is developed at the scoping phase itself, where how much severe, sensitive is the wildlife and natural environment in this particular area. So all of these all these agencies at the international level also require that. So you can see how important it is. So at the scoping stage, what do you really determine? What do you really try to find out? So at the scoping stage, you try to find out the study area. So what will be the impact area? How much area you have to study? You can call the same as the project affected area, so impact area. So you need to identify that, delineate that. You need to understand how much area one needs to study, so that you will come an understanding with the agency, and then you will see that how much area I really need to cover in my baseline assessment. And then you also need to fix the survey methodology, like what kind of methods, what kind of approach you're going to use, what kind of methods you're going to use in your particular survey. So that all is undertaken at the scoping stage itself. You fix it at this stage. And then also what kind of assessment methodologies you will undertake. So certain methods for survey purpose, and it has to be aligned with what methods you will use for the assessment purpose. And then also you will look at what is the significance for that as well, what kind of methods you will use. And you also need to identify what are the key ecological issues to be addressed, and what issues you will include and what issues you will not include in the list. So all that has to be taken care at this particular stage. In the scoping stage, you should involve experts, consultants from the domain, and should refer to the international best practice as well. And then you have to also refer to all the national instructions which are covered here. And in many practices, mainly you will see in the international, that they define the area to be studied. So in many of the cases, they already define it, like how much area you have to cover. For example, you can see in UK, they specify that 2 kilometer radius has to be taken from any polygon or the area of your study. So entire 2 kilometer radius, the study has to be done. And in case of any linear project, for example, a rail line project or a road project, canal project, for all those you have to take all along 1 kilometer wide study area along the linear element. So at some of the study like legislation or the guidelines already ask you to cover that way. So you can also see that. So depending on which area you're studying, which country you're studying in, and then you can refer to those guidelines here. And you also note that the data required can be very extensive, intensive in sense like, so therefore you should, in the scoping stage, you should know what are your main concerns. So because every main concern has to be undertaken in form of a detailed study, or intensive data has to be collected. So you cannot take care of everything. So you need to understand what's important and what's not important. And particularly it's of importance that you focus on the species of conservation value. So when we say that species of conservation value, we also call it like valued ecosystem components, VEC, valued ecosystem components. What do we really mean by that? So valued ecosystem components means that these are the species, or it can be habitat or sites that have ecological and conservation value, or other attributes, such as like they have a socioeconomic value to the people who are affected by the project, or who are in the project area. So any significance which it has, so that those species, habitat or sites have to be identified. So valued ecosystem components. So the best way to identify these value ecosystem component is one very basic simple step is to look at the country's protected list of species, habitats, specific priority species and habitats. So most of the countries retain that, so that's the best way to check that if any of those are in your category, you need to first identify them. So in any case, you should also include all the receptors that may deserve further investigation in the scoping stage. So you need to identify what are the receptors. When I say receptors, means whatever impact will happen. So which are the species who are going to will be on the receiving end of those impact. So that all you need to also identify in the scoping stage itself. So at the scoping stage, you will enter an agreement with the authority of like what will be the scope of EIA, what all you're going to cover within the EIA. So when you start your work, before starting, you will come to an agreement with the authority. Like these are the things, these are the studies which will be undertaken in this. So you would be required to fix the methods to be used for survey, what kind of method you will use for each habitat and for species under investigation. So for what you will do what, like for flora, what kind of surveys you will take, for fauna, what kind of surveys you take, and within that also you might have little further details which have to be spelled out here. And then you would also express what number, what timing and location where you will do this survey. So that can be very important in these cases because many of the seasonal migratory species with that, it's very important that when do you really survey so that you don't miss out on very key elements. So other is the methods to be used to assess ecological importance, impact magnitude and impact significance. So what kind of method you're going to use, how you're going to make that decision, that whether that impact, what's the magnitude of that impact and what is the significance of that impact. So this may differ for each species and habitat, and also where species are permanently resident or migratory. So that it all might differ, so you need to be very careful how you're making these commitments and what approach you're adopting. And then you also need to fix how you're going to report all these things, what you find in the study, how you're going to report, and what would be the reporting requirement. So at the scoping stage, you fix all of this and you enter an agreement with the authority. So in India, we have terms of reference and we have sector-wise terms of reference. So I'll be providing you some of the examples so you can look at them various sector-wise as per your interest, as per your domain. You can look into that. So here I have just snipped one of the example here. You can see how in the terms of reference it is mentioned. I have highlighted that in box. You can see that how land use based on satellite imagery, including locations, specific sensitivities such as national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, these all need to be described. Then you need to, number 32, you can see geological features and geohydrological status of the study area has to be given, and also surface water quality of nearby water source and other drainage has to be given. And then you also see number 42, you can see ecological status of the study area such as habitat type, quality, species, diversity, rarity, fragmentation, ecological linkages, age, abundance, and so on has to be provided. So this is taken from the thermal power plant TOR. So in this way, all sector TORs are there. So for a particular sector for which you are working, you can look at what will be the terms of reference. So you also see that additional points are required based on the sensitivity of the area and the study. So there will be certain standard procedure, but based on in which area you are studying, you have to give certain additional requirements would be there. And when we say sensitivity of the area under study, like you have sensitivity in terms of how far it is from certain ecological sensitive areas, how much is the area and what's the significance of that area, how important it is to the community, to the nation, and for the entire system what you're studying. So mostly, how do you really find out ecological sensitive areas? Like nation might already have identified a list of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, then you have tiger reserves, elephant turtle nesting ground, then you have mangroves, wetland, reserved and protected forest, wildlife protected areas. So all these lists you can see. So that can help you to identify those areas. So that was about the scoping stage, where we had studied in the EIA process that's one stage where you determine what all you're going to cover, what all you will not cover, and what methods and other things you're going to involve. So that was about the scoping. So now moving on to the desk studies and surveys, so where you will really start undertaking study. You will start undertaking survey and study. So here you can see the list of important components for EIA. I have taken it from the manual for the thermal power plants. So here you can see what kind of studies are suggested to be undertaken in this biological domain. You can see one needs to undertake species composition of flora and fauna. One needs to undertake flora type, density, exploitation. For fauna, you need to look at the distribution, what kind of distribution is there, what kind of varieties are there, what's the abundance, what's the number of each kind, which are the rare species, which are the migratories, and what kind of diversity is there, and what kind of habitat is required. What's the resilience of the habitat, what's the economic significance, and then the commercial value, and so on, you need to find out. And similarly for the fisheries, the migratory species with commercial and recreational values. So those are already given, and you will look at the methods and levels of study. So when you undertake desk studies and do the survey, you have at every stage you might have to adopt some method. Some method can be very detailed and intensive, so you might not take it at the preliminary stage, but only to get a basic idea you might take a simpler method in the beginning, and when you are sure that these areas have to be looked into after your basic study, then you might go for a detailed study methodology. So it's important to have phase-wise strategy, like in the initial stage, what you're going to do, at the later stage when you have to undertake detailed study, what you're going to do. So it's important that you identify strategies, a phase-wise strategy for what kind of methods you're going to adopt for baseline survey. So anything which requires detailed studies, so those kind of methods can be taken up at the later stage when you have much more clarity on what has to be done. So there are a lot of data sources which hold a lot of suitable ecological data. So when you are collecting data, you need not collect all the data from the primary survey, but then there can be a lot of secondary survey. So for example, you can see ecological natural history data centers, and then there can be local history centers. You can have internet data sets. Like you have global biodiversity information. You also have IUCN red list of threatened species, national red lists. You will also find national red list. You will also see national natural history, nature conservation, ecology, or environmental authorities would also keep information, and local museums and libraries would also have information, and then many of the academic institutions and universities would also have information. So these would be a very regular places for you to look for ecological data. So even for that matter, you can have national park authorities, the NGOs, and then various interest groups who might retain data. So here in this, you can see as per the manual from where all, I have again taken it from the thermal power plant manual, then you can see what are the different sources of data for the ecological purpose. So biological environments, you can see that you can, for the purpose of inventory of flora, fauna within certain radius, and then to identify all kind of species, endangered species, aquatic fauna, forest land, forest type, density of vegetations, and so on. The source of information is district gazetteers. You can look at the National Remote Sensing Agency, NRSA, and then you can also look at Forest Survey of India, Wildlife Institutions of India, Wildlife Fund, Zoological Survey of India, Botanical Survey of India, Bombay Natural History Society, State Forest Department, State Fisheries Department, Ministry of Environment and Forest, State Agriculture Department, and agriculture universities. So these are the possible sources of data which you see here. So you should check whenever you get data, you should check the strength, what's the potential of that particular data, how robust is that particular data, because that will also affect what kind of analysis you can undertake. So if there is inconsistent data, probably you won't be able to undertake many of the analysis. So you may also use experienced ecologists to understand some of the data requirement. That was about the sources and how you have to, different levels of study you might have to take, and then how from where you can get what kind of data. Further looking into resource requirements and timing, so there will be a lot of variation in terms of what kind of resources needed and what kind of time is needed for EIA, and it will all depend on what kind of information is already available for your study area. So if there's no data available, then you might have to undertake a lot of primary study. You have to go and survey and do that, would consume a lot of time, a lot of money. If a lot of information is already available, then it would reduce your time span for collecting all those information. So one has to be very careful about like how much they can commit for. And there's a lot of suggestion on using the GIS mapping for this purpose. That also helps, and it is suggested because GIS allows to integrate all the information, and then it also allows for the further analysis part. You also need to look into the human resource, what kind of human resource you have, and then you might also need ecological experts for your purpose. And you would, in this particular case, you might need the licensed experts, so experts, ecologists, professionals who have licenses. So that would be the requirement, who have certificates and licenses, so then they can only undertake these kind of studies. And it's important because then those people are able to identify species and take appropriate samples and undertake analysis. So they would be able to identify what kind of species have to be taken, what kind of samples have to be taken, how, from where they have to be collected, and how those data will be analyzed. You also take note that timing of the field work is also important factor, very important factor, because there can be a lot of variation in terms of what happens in one season and what happens in the another season, and then there can be migratory species as well. So you need to carefully plan and observe all the variations. It is usually suggested that when you are doing ecological impact assessment, you should start 1 year before the submission date of the EIA report. So you would at least take 1 year to undertake this study. So you, as per the suggestion, one needs to plan at least 1 year to undertake the complete study. You also see that in some countries there may be specific requirements and procedure to follow for protected or threatened species, and these can cause like considerable delay. So you need to take care of that. What kind of suggestions are made in your advice are made, or requirements are there in your particular country. So you see that UK has its own considerations, what has to be covered, and then you can also find other like internationally also they have other parameters which have to be considered. So that's about the resources and timing. And then if you look at the initial baseline surveys, when you look at the initial baseline surveys, if you see that species and habitats in each region of the world, they are different. And then for that region, national requirements should be referred. So you need to first see in the country you're working what kind of national requirements are there. So it's important to engage with the local ecological specialist also, so that they know what has to be followed. And they will have local knowledge and also expertise to deal with all the authority, and then also have a good knowledge about the local national legislation and what are their survey requirements. So in case of initial survey, you should be able to identify like what are the main ecosystems, what are the main habitats and species population which might be affected by the proposed project, and then what is their interdependency also. So you need to look at that. Then you need to identify what are the species, what are the rare species, protected species in your study area in terms of like flora and fauna. You need to take care of that. And you also need to look at the potential role of the affected features and process in a wider landscape context. So if whatever impact is happening on the flora and fauna, you need to also understand what is the role of those particular species, what role they play, because if what kind of impact is happening, and then what kind of secondary impact it might have, or cumulative impact it might have. Further, you need to find out important ecosystem services and the different like properties of it. You have already seen different ecosystem services, and so you need to find out what are those ecosystem services, and then you need to find out like also express what kind of gaps are there in the knowledge and identification, because whatever survey and study you would be doing, there would be a limitation about what kind of methods you're using, plus what kind of information is already available. So that all needs to be spelled out. For this purpose, for the initial stage, you can use very simple techniques such as ecologist field walking. So you can simply walk in the study area. You can also take visual assessments of the development site. So you do the visual assessments, you can do photography, you can make notes, field notes, and then you can also do recording and mapping of the area. And see like mapping can be thematic mapping, and you can look at like what kind of habitats and vegetation types are there, and then for this purpose you might use relevant classification system also. So looking at some of the classification systems, so you do find UK Joint Nature Conservation Committee has habitat classification. They have a system of that. Then you also find CFG survey monitoring protocol, which is used in state of California. Then you also find vegetation classification system in the US. So you can find all these classification systems which are there. So looking at what kind of methods are available for spatial mapping of vegetation, so you can use like handheld electronic devices and GPS, so you can use that. You can also use satellite imagery, you can use aerial photography, GIS can be used. Then there's line intercept method, so where you along any project area, you draw parallel lines on the map or aerial photography, and you take stock of what all things are crossing and or are there in that particular range. So that's the line intercept method. And this approach provides the measure of proportion. So like you look at the percentage of the site covered by each habitat type. So you get an idea about what is the proportion, what kind of varieties are there, to what extent they are. So that all is provided here. You also find some more techniques which are used for the wildlife purpose, as observation on the presence of tracks. So you can find the wildlife tracks, you can see, you can make notes of what kind of ranges you're seeing. You can see the sign of feeding, so you can see the bones and carcasses if or you can find on site. Then you can also see the resting or occupation areas, you can see runnels, tunnels, then you can see hairs and feathers. Then you can also look for scratch marks on vegetations and in the soil, and then scat and downs of feces can also be seen for finding out what kind of varieties are there. So you would also find range of guides in this. So here we can see that you have some of the measurements system which are available. So there are like semi-quantitative abundance rating, which is there, in which you have visual estimation system. So you visually estimate, and it is also called as DAFOR, D-A-F-O-R, in which D is like dominant. You see what kind of species are dominant, and then you see what is like abundant. Abundant, A for abundant, and F for frequent, which you see frequently, and O for occasional, and R for rare, and then you can have locally, or if it is required, if it is locally available material. So advantage of this particular system is that it's very fast, but then the disadvantage of the system is that it's very subjective. You might and it gives a lot of approximation, and if it's very approximate,